Hello and welcome to our podcast. I'm Dani, and today Great.com talks with Rachel Morrison, the project manager at Good Neighbours Canada. If you haven't heard of it yet, its mission is to promote and protect children's rights, strengthen global partnerships, and advocate for human rights in a respectful and effective way. When you're here to this podcast, remember press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app. Hi, Rachel, and welcome.
Hi, Danny. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. Let's learn more about Good Neighbors and the work that you guys are doing both in Canada and internationally.
Mhm.
How did it all begin, Rachel? I think it's been quite a long journey for you guys, right?
Yes, good question. So, Good Neighbours Canada is part of Good Neighbours International. And so, Good Neighbours International has been operating since 1991. We were founded over in South Korea with the intention of fulfilling our mandate of empowering people, transforming communities. So, we are an international humanitarian development agency. Some of our first projects were providing support to children living with disabilities, providing healthcare, and we now work in 49 countries around the world, soon to turn 50 countries actually, across Africa, Latin America, Asia, North America, and Europe. Good Neighbours Canada, we are just one office of this international network. We were founded in 2017, so we turned 7 years old this year. And we started out fundraising for key international projects relating to water access and education and emergency relief efforts after natural disasters. And even in our short 7 year history, we have grown significantly. We operate out of Toronto, Ontario, in Canada, and we now offer support to a much larger number of international projects as well in the fields of health, education, gender equality and women's empowerment, emergency relief and psychosocial support, and child poverty alleviation. So quite a diverse array of activities, I'm sure.
Talking about these regions, I know that it's a lot to encompass in a short answer, but considering the themes that you mentioned actually, and you're basically in almost every continent. Am I correct in my account of that?
Yeah, I believe
Yeah.
so.
It must be like a myriad of issues, with different challenges. What are the most pressing issues really that you're finding in the field, like with these communities? What are you seeing in there?
Mhm. Yeah, so we support communities that are in a number of different ways underserved, underrepresented, and thus undersupported by the decision makers in positions of power around the world. So our community's most pressing issues basically come from a lack of access to the services and support that they would need to thrive. So here in Canada, we do implement projects in our own country as well. The communities we support here face discrimination due to aspects of their identity a lot of the time. So, for example, if you're a newcomer to Canada and you can't speak the language, if you're a person of color who's deprioritized for support, or if you're, for example, a senior and don't have access to basic systems because of all the world's technological advancements have left you tech illiterate. So we're targeting a lot of vulnerable groups here in Canada. Um, and then some of our overseas work in developing countries have much bigger challenges than we can even imagine here in the developed world. People lacking basic access to services that we're lucky enough to take for granted. Things like girls having no support to attend school because their academic education isn't seen as important. Families sometimes needing to send their children to walk for hours just to access water. No basic understanding of healthcare, inadequate access to doctors. Realistically, all of the communities that we support in Good Neighbours are people who are suffering, not because of their own doing, but because they are oppressed by their environment. And so the development, whatever that needs to look like for the community, is happening to sort of bridge those gaps and make sure that people have the access to the support that they need in order to thrive.
That's really, really amazing, honestly. And I think from your webpage, which I'm going to share with people right now, which is goodneighborscanada.ca, people can get more information. But in there, I see that internationally, you are operating in, as you mentioned, 4 different areas, right? So you talk about better life for girls that you mentioned and clean water because it's something that we are not we take for that's the bit that we take for granted that you mentioned, right?
Very much so,
Yeah, very
yeah.
much so. But I'm quite interested in understanding, and again, my curiosity here, how are you able to sort of tailor those programs to these communities? Are you working close with them? And that got me thinking also when you mentioned that office that you have in Romania, right? So you will need to be able to be close. It must be a huge structure. How can you first tailor the programs to these communities, and how do you get the whole thing going?
Yeah. I love this question, firstly, because it is one that like it's really hard to understand if you're outside of an organization. So I do love explaining this one. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We've got these big umbrellas for the different kinds of support that we do. Better Life for Girls is one that we're very proud of. That just sort of encompasses all of our gender equity kind of programs. So things to do with health, things to do with education, all of the areas in which often women and girls are disadvantaged. But the way that Good Neighbours operates is on a community driven basis. And so that means that in all of the places where Good Neighbours has an office, those local staff members have very strong relationships with their local communities. Many of our offices have been running for 20, coming up to 30 years. And so the local community and the staff themselves who live in that community are very able to identify their own needs. Not us folks here in Canada going over with our own assumptions, based on our culture and our upbringing, saying, this is the way that this community lives differently to me, and therefore it's wrong, and therefore we need to change it. But it's actually, Good Neighbours Canada doesn't take any of the decision-making power away from the area where the project is to be implemented. So we work by listening to the community members. All projects are developed based on their demand and their suggestions. And we also implement them through the community members as well. So for example, Good Neighbours Canada in our water access program, we're currently supporting Good Neighbours Zambia, which is a really nice way of demonstrating this. So the local community themselves suggest to the Good Neighbours Zambia office, hey, we think this is a good location for us to build a clean water well. Here within our villages where a lot of us will be able to access it very easily, this is what we want to happen. So Good Neighbours Zambia then makes that happen, hires the engineers, puts all the support in place. We drill that borehole and we put that clean water well there. And then we train the local community members in how to maintain it and keep it running and test the water quality. So we have a local committee who are responsible for the ongoing maintenance of that project. So the community is not just involved, but they're actually the sole route through which the project is implemented. And that's just one example, but we actually, that's sort of how we work in all of our projects all around the world. We listen to the people and support them rather than doing things that we think would work best that we might not always be correct about.
Well, I think that's the perfect example, honestly, because it shows how things can get moving from one country to the other, and how collectively you can make something that's meaningful and makes sense to a certain community. So thanks for that example. But thinking about that, I also keep thinking about the challenges that you guys must face, because not just politically getting so involved in a community, but also logistically to be able to have everything in place and keep things moving. Could you share some of the challenges? Because I'm just guessing here, but the reality must be different, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're right, certainly to, come in with one idea of a kind of development project that we could run, like water access. Of course, we do need to really assess how we can best do that in all the different locations, even different locations within one country, never mind around the world. So that is, we make sure that all of our projects are very, very well planned before we go ahead and do anything, so as to make sure that there's no waste involved and the community is happy with what we do. But another challenge I would name, Good Neighbours Canada, a lot of what we do is actually fundraising for our international programs. And realistically, it can be very hard to gain public attention here in Canada for international issues. This isn't because people are selfish or because people don't care, but it's actually because everybody is going through a hard time. We're on the way out of a horrible pandemic that changed everybody's lives. And it's human nature, really, to focus on issues that are more proximal to us. So when here in Canada we talk about international issues, we just don't always resonate as much as when we hear like this issue is happening round the corner from where you live, or in your children's school or whatever. So the way that we have to address this is through good storytelling, which I hope we're doing, and we definitely want to continue doing for the foreseeable future. We want to humanize the issues that we're seeking to solve so that people can understand them, even though they feel very far away. So it might sound counterintuitive, but taking away sometimes like the mass of numbers, like when we report on, 100,000 people are affected by this thing, but actually focusing down on one person's lived experience can really help someone to understand the sort of plight of someone going through an issue that feels very different to their own life. So we use a lot of case studies in the way that we demonstrate our work and our impact. Even the fact that I just gave that example in the previous question you asked me, it helps us show the impact and the way that we can sort of make a change. So again, to give an example here, Good Neighbours International around the world, we have sponsored over 200,000 children living in poverty who are now able to access education, healthcare, family support. That's great. But if I could tell you, thanks to one sponsor here in Canada who has been donating $35 per month, there's a young girl named Vanessa in sub-Saharan Africa who was previously working every single day at her parents' brick factory to help them feed her, to help them get enough money just to keep their family well. She's been able to stop working there and she can now go to school. She was bought new clothes for the first time in her life. She's no longer in pain from carrying heavy bricks every day. She's been learning maths and geography and science, and she has dreams of sort of going beyond her cultural expectations and becoming a teacher to empower other children. You can really see the shift in the way that we emotionally respond to that story. So that is the way that we sort of try very hard to demonstrate the importance and the impact of humanitarian work, and to overcome that challenge of this issue isn't about me, so I don't need to care. But really, when we think human to human connection, we all do really care because we are all humans who care very deeply about one another.
Rachel, I think you're doing a great job with storytelling because it did help me see like the issue in a different perspective, I believe. But
Lovely.
then,
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
oh, it's just true. But I gotta ask you something. Well, I want to ask you something. Because I heard recently here a guest mentioning how hard it is. They have found. I'm sorry, I'm going to start that over. Um, but I want to ask you something because a guest has recently told me here a challenge that they are facing, that their organization is facing, of reaching out to younger generations. I'm noticing that challenge as well. I just start thinking about this because I don't think I've ever stopped to really question it if things are changing from one generation to another. Maybe the amount of content, it's influencing, but is this also being a challenge to you guys?
That's a really interesting point. And I would say yes and no. So, on the whole, within our sort of supporter base as a charity, I would say that we don't have quite so many young adult donors to Good Neighbours Canada as we do older folks who, maybe have been working for a number of years and have a bit more disposable income. And that is to be expected, really. When you think of the kind of person who might have additional income and maybe even additional time, when we talk about other ways of supporting charities through like volunteering or something, that can be more accessible to people maybe in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and up. So accessing young people as like prospective supporters of your charity, I guess it can be quite hard in terms of getting that like financial support. But I wouldn't say that young people are particularly lacking in motivation to help. And it's about sort of changing your approach to the way that we can call. Oh no, let me start that bit again. And it's about changing our approach to the way that we communicate with different age groups of supporters. And so a lot of the younger generation are very tech literate and use social media. So one of the ways that we can reach out to them and really sort of drive their motivation to support international issues is through social media platforms like Instagram or TikTok, or meeting the young people where they are. And so yes, I would definitely say we don't really expect for strong financial support to come from young people, but that doesn't mean that that drive isn't there, and that ability just to reshare or spread the word about an organization is not there among young folks as well.
Thank you. Thank you for fostering my curiosity here. And now talking about people engaging and people helping, what are the best ways for folks listening to us right now or even watching us on YouTube to help you guys keep going?
Okay, sure. So, firstly, if you are interested in helping us to keep going, thank you. You are a humanitarian, you are valued, and it can feel like the world is going through so much, but the drive and inspiration that we do have to make the world a better place is what keeps this sector going. So, thanks for anybody's interest. Good Neighbours Canada, all of our work can be read about on our website, which, as Danny mentioned earlier, or on our social media. On there, you can read about all of our projects that we've got going on, and you can make a donation either generally to everything that our charity does, or there might be a specific project that you resonate with, and you can choose to either give a one-time gift to that project. A lot of the things that we do sometimes have like set amounts that you can donate to create a tangible impact. So, for example, with our Better Life for Girls campaign, you can donate the full cost of one dignity kit so that one woman in rural Cameroon has everything that she needs to manage her period. And that's just $29 in Canadian. Or you can set up a monthly donation to our causes, which makes a huge difference for us as a charity because we can then predict the amount of support that we'll be able to give to each of our projects over time. And as I mentioned earlier, that money goes towards paying experts in their community, not folks traveling in from other more privileged positions and directing a community on what they should do or what they should look like. Yeah, and another thing I think that's quite wonderful to point out specifically on this podcast, where we have quite a diverse listener base. If you're listening from a different country to where I am, Good Neighbours International has many countries all around the world. We have support countries in Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Australia, the UK, and the US. And our implementing partners exist across over 40 countries in loads of different continents. So you can just do an online search for Good Neighbours and your country name to see which location is closest to you. And if you are interested in supporting them financially or even by doing some in-person work with them, that would be absolutely amazing and very, very welcomed.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us today. This was a great talk. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was amazing to be here.
And for everyone listening or watching, thank you too for staying with us for one more episode. And remember, if you enjoyed it, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because that shows the algorithms that this is an important conversation and we can spread the word about the importance of the Good Neighbors Canada. Check their page, help if you can, and I see you in the next episode.